Okay, go ahead.
Confirming member access as a preliminary matter. This is the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. Chairman Andy Lowell to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Same with the staff and anticipated speakers. I will do that at the end of this announcement. Introduction to the remote meeting. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. For Zoom meetings, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Meeting business ground rules. We're now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Members of the board, when I call your name, please respond. I see Mr. Franzuto.
Aye.
I see Tom Sidlowski.
Hi.
Dan
Here.
Pronk is here.
Affirmative.
Mr. Bossy
I'm here.
and Ginger.
I'm here.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. I see staff. I see Jeff Carlson
Good afternoon.
and Tara Riley.
Here.
Thank you. I'll recognize Connors being in the audience. If he wishes to speak, he may do so. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, March 2nd, 2021. Do we have approval of tonight's agenda, please?
So
So
moved,
moved.
Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay, the motion's made by Ginger Andrews, seconded by Tom Sidlowski to approve tonight's agenda. All in favor, Mr. Franzuto,
Aye.
Mr. Bossy,
Aye.
Mr. Brace. Mr. Brace
Aye.
and Mr. Lowell votes aye. Approval of minutes tonight, draft minutes of February 16th. Has everybody had a chance to review? I have, you've got Eelgrass reminder being on the 21st of March. I believe the meeting is the 31st. Mr. Brace, please.
I think so.
Yeah, the
I heard the
21st, the 21st is a Sunday, so in my past notes, the Eelgrass Summit is March 31st.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
I heard the 21st on the tape.
Oh, all right, all right.
So maybe
Um,
maybe Tara can clarify for us.
All right. At the end of the Marine Department report, there's one place where you refer to me as Ms. instead of Mr.
Easy to
That's
spell.
all. That's all I have. Anybody else? Corrections? If not, do we have a motion to approve the minutes of February 16th? Mr. Sidlowski,
So moved.
is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Mr. Sidlowski motioned approval, Ms. Andrews, second. All in favor, Mr. Franzuto.
Aye.
Mr. Lowell votes aye. Mr. Brace,
Aye.
Mr. Bossy,
Aye.
and Mr. Pronk was not here. So you may abstain, Mr. Pronk. All right, Chairman's report. Once again, Eelgrass Summit, I believe March 31st. Tara, could you butt in and just clarify that?
I'm looking right now.
All right. All right, another announcement under Chairman's report, nomination papers for the upcoming election will be available March 15th. And the deadline to submit is April 27th. Ms. Andrews' seat and my seat are up for this election. And I've spoke with Ms. Andrews in the past. She said she was interested in running again. I'm as well interested in running again, but I would just encourage anybody in the public interested to please throw their hat in the ring. Moving forward for a Marine Department report, who would like to start? Mr. Carlson or Ms. Riley?
You mean
I'm
that's
sorry.
natural resources?
I'm sorry, Marine Department report. I'm sorry. Is Ms. Lucy with us?
She's not.
Okay. Well, now we'll move, sorry about that. Now we'll move forward to natural resources. Mr. Carlson, or,
Go for it, Tara. We'll let you start.
thank you. Tara?
Okay, thank you. It looks like the Eelgrass conference is on March 23rd.
Ah, wow. Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, that's 2021. I'm gonna have to look, double
All right.
check. It's hard to look up because it's Zoastropalooza, so it's
Yeah.
a weird name. It's not under Eelgrass Conference 2021. There is the National Shellfish Association Conference, which is a really big one that is going on around the same time. It's March 22nd through the 25th. And we were supposed to attend that last year and it got canceled. So we will hopefully be attending virtually this year from the hatchery. And so, yeah, the hatchery is running full tilt right now. We've got our algae systems full. We had our first bay scallop spawn yesterday. We spawned, I think it was like 90 bay scallops that we had conditioned. It only took 2 weeks to get them ripe to spawn, which is like a record time. Usually it takes 3 to 6 weeks. So I feel like they were starting to ripen probably out in the water already. I'm not really sure. I've never seen it happen this quickly before, but in any case, they were ready to spawn. We got 50 million eggs and we'll drain them down tomorrow and see what hatched out. So it's a little early this year, but we like to just get some larvae in the pipeline just to see if there's anything we need to fix and just kind of like a test run before we, really do the runs that count. On Friday, we have an Eelgrass meeting with the Land Council to kind of talk about their goals with the eelgrass for Nantucket and discuss our goals and see, how we can collaborate and work together and if we're missing any information between the two of us. The Land Council is also holding a water quality forum this month, and I believe in April too. So I can get you those dates. The first one is going to include myself, Simon Edwards, Melanie Kodalak, and I think two others, and we're going to be talking about Shellfish and, various things that are going on related to water quality around Nantucket. And that'll be virtual, so I'll give you that information as well, as soon as they give me the times for that. And as far as I know, Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong, Jen Carberg's project passed the Nantucket Conservation, past Concom, her permitting past Concom last week. So I think that is good to go pending other permits that she needs. And we are closing our hiring dates tomorrow for our 3 seasonal positions. So hopefully we got lots of applicants for the summer. And so we'll be interviewing shortly after we receive those applications. And that's all I have for right now. Jeff, you want to fill in the holes?
I think that was pretty good. Just a couple of things I add, kind of an opportunity that came up late today and kind of into last week after some discussion, is the work that we had done originally with Stephen Heck and the Great Harbor Yacht Club Foundation for those Bay Scallop, Whelk, and Eelgrass surveys in Nantucket Harbor for the last 2 years. We are hopefully applying for a Massachusetts MVP grant to extend that not only to Nantucket for the next 2 years, but also into Madaket Harbor and around Tuckernuck as well. So after some talk, our assistant town manager and strategic projects manager, Chuck Larson, kind of agreed that that was probably a good application to put forward into the state MVP program, which is kind of a vulnerability program. So these assessments fit in with a lot of different things, especially as it relates to cultural and economic significance. So hopefully we'll get that proposal put together and submitted by the end of the month on time. But as we get closer to that, would hopefully be able to come back to you guys maybe for your next meeting on the agenda and ask for a letter of support for that project to include with that application. So we'll forward that information and what those proposals and what the last report from 2019, Steve is finishing up the one from 2020 now, to take a look at as far as the Bay Scallop and Whelk populations in the harbor and eelgrass. So if Tara wants to fill in any gaps on that for what that is, that's fine, or else I'll move on. So all right. So kind of moving on, other things that are happening. Obviously, we're moving forward in a lot of things. The coastal resiliency plan is still moving forward. So something that'll impact you guys. I know you guys, I believe, have had some discussion and have some involvement with that as well. So that's continuing to move on and move forward. For that happening, other things that are happening, I know there's an agenda item about the Oyster lease, so I'll wait till then. But I wanted to give a little update. I know Kona had a question about the closure out in Madaket and some issues that we've been having there, and kind of dealing with that issue with the state and the town and the environmental police and the Department of Public Health and those folks, because there's some confusion and some overlapping jurisdiction and some issues with that. And hopefully some longer term fixes to kind of prevent the confusion going forward that we've kind of been exploring and looking at, that everyone seems to be fairly acceptable with, including the DMF and NTPH. So obviously that closure in Madaket happened. It's related to fecal coliform and bacteria out in the water, out in the Warren's Landing area. I think everyone has the background on it pretty thoroughly. The state closed it to everything with the exception, the way that regulation that they use is listed is it exempts out whelk and bay scallops. And then after some discussion with the environmental police and the Department of Public Health, they didn't feel that it was a very enforceable closure for the fact that you could go back and forth and pick up bycatch. And there was a lot of different issues related to harvesting from that area. And kind of from their recommendation, they've recommended that it just be closed. And I think some of us were disappointed with that and understand their point. But I think what we're hoping to do is, one, kind of ramp up some testing out there and get some long-term strategies put in place to alleviate the loading in that area, whether it's the septics that are out there or some of the other inputs, and try to narrow down what it is. We're not sure if it's, from waterfowl or from septics exclusively or from other overland runoff, but try to narrow that down and eliminate what we can, and hopefully test cleaner. But I think the way that we've discussed kind of internally to work around kind of the conflicting guidance from the state, from the DMF and from the environmental police is to develop some regulations that allow for fishing within there, but kind of limits the fishing activity to that area and eliminates the bycatch issue if you're fishing in that area. And we drafted up some language that I'm trying to get it to town council to get reviewed as quickly as we can. I know there are folks that would like to fish in there. And I think we'd like to have it at least in place before next recreational and next commercial season, obviously, but like to get it in place as quickly as possible to also deal with some of the folks that may like to be out shellfishing during the summer, whether it's for quahogs or other species that are in season that time of year, to understand why that area is closed, but then hopefully have it back open for scallops here in the fall without that kind of conflicting guidance from different state agencies. So I know that's confusing, but it's something that we're actively trying to resolve, and hopefully we'll get clean water passed, but also have a backup plan in case this comes up in the future. So hopefully that answers people's questions. I'm happy to answer them more if necessary. But that's kind of it from our end, and I'll leave my update on Mr. Lambrecht's aquaculture lease to the agenda item.
Well, Jeff, just to clarify, is this in the shellfish closure? Is it the same narrow strip that went from like Jackson's Point to somewhere in the area of Little Neck?
Correct.
Okay, it hasn't gotten any bigger.
No, it hasn't. I know there's some kind of talk at the state level and the federal level that there's some potential new regulations coming related to mooring areas. I have asked repeatedly to see what those are going to look like and what that's going to be. But I haven't seen those yet. And the DMF says that they're working with the FDA on what that will be. So there may be some changes to that when those come out, when and if that happens. But I'm not sure when that's going to be. That's kind of a part of the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. I'm not sure at the pace that they run.
And is there any indication of a possible source at this point?
The general thought is it's probably a combination of waterfowl and in septic. And also there's a pretty significant outfall pipe that comes out in the Warren's Landing area that kind of services that watershed. So we're trying to put together some tests to kind of test back to see where it is. We've even looked into the potential of doing kind of a fecal, I wish Thais was here to use the real words, but essentially it's a test where you look at it and you try to trace back the source kind of at a DNA level of where that has come from, whether it's, a warm-blooded mammal or something else, to kind of trace it back. Haven't found a lot of vendors that do that. It's kind of a strange test. So we're still trying to look to narrow it down, but I think, our approach right now is to kind of tackle all avenues for land-based stuff and try to get the homeowners that are out there to maybe get their systems inspected. Obviously, if sewer comes to Matica at some point in the next few years, that will alleviate and take away that input entirely. But we've been trying to reach out to some of those homeowners on Little Neck and encourage them to get inspected, use fertilizers the right way, and try to hopefully minimize their direct inputs, and then also kind of ratchet back through the watershed if we're not seeing those improvements. So hopefully we'll make some progress there.
Are fishermen reporting that there's scallops that could be harvested in that area?
Yeah, I know Smitty sent me a message not so long ago and said that there were definitely some kind of in and around that area. I mean, obviously with it being closed, I don't think a ton of guys are obviously going fishing through there. So it's tough to say. I mean, I know the last couple of days out in Matica, there have only been 2 boats that have been going. And I even just to add into town, and sorry, I skipped this part, is, really we're seeing on nice weather days, kind of 5 to 7 boats that are going. And on bad weather days, anywhere from 1 to 4, kind of between both harbors, and Matica's really down to 2 or 3. So it's a pretty thin group that's out there at the moment. And I know they were closed today for the temperature, so no one went today.
Mr. Brace, did you have a question?
Yeah, just 2 points. Mr. Carlson, there was the closure of Shimo Creek, or restrictions put on by DMF at Shimo Creek, maybe last spring or summer. And Leah was saying maybe that was because seasonal homeowners were here sooner, sheltering from COVID, and that they're firing up their septic systems sooner than they normally would. So do you think that maybe that's a situation that's happening in Matticat? And then the other thing I wanted to say, and then, sorry, then you can answer, was for the area that's closed off, does that mean that JC is going to spend the whole day out there making sure nobody goes and drags that, or is it going to be the honor system, or?
Yeah, so just to kind of take those in order, the Shimo Creek one in Matticat too, I think what's kind of important to keep in mind with this is they're not necessarily isolated to one specific incident. You don't fail one test and then automatically go to closures. The way that the DMF explained it to us is over time, you have a certain threshold and a certain of percentages where you have some allowable failures and detection limits that are in different ranges. And both of those sites kind of accumulated. The one thing that I think we wish in hindsight is it would have been really nice to know, hey, you guys are getting close where you're at, 8 of 10. If you get 2 more, that area is going closed, because that may have changed how we were prioritizing things. But it came in both cases kind of suddenly. And then to get those reopened it takes a series of time. So we're testing Shimo extra kind of on our own and independently to try to get at least a data set that we can look at and say, hey, we think increasing testing there at the state level would be helpful and hopefully get sites reopened. I think we would love to get all of our sites open without restriction. But for them, they have a process and a standard that they have to meet, and it's not always super clear. And we've been trying to be in more regular contact with them about it. As for patrolling any closed area, whether it's the one in Matticat and Shimo, or there's like the little one off of, Fargo Way, there's a little one off of Co2. There's a couple other ones. They get regularly patrolled in kind of a random fashion just to make sure that you're keeping the honest people honest. Obviously people that want to occasionally sneak in there or get in there may be able to do so the right time and right place, but it's been pretty successful so far. We haven't had too many issues and haven't had really any issues in Shimo or those areas. And obviously it's always a concern, and, to kind of tie it into a more positive project, it's even a concern when we talk about doing projects like the Conservation Foundation one up in Pulpus with, them constructing a potential oyster reef off of the Medui Creek area. Obviously you don't want people in there mucking around, or the aquaculture leases. So any of those areas, get kind of randomly patrolled to make sure that's there. Obviously, if people see something, they can call it in. But it just gets patrolled on a regular basis, just like any other site. So I think we're confident that it's going okay. But we would also love to try to get stuff in place to get that stuff open.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other board members, questions for Jeff or Tara? I'm not seeing any public comment for Jeff or Tara, whether it's Natural Resources or Marine Department. Board members as well, not seeing any. Jeff, in the beginning of your report, you mentioned the collaboration with the Great Harbor Yacht Club. Can we consider that to be part of, what was announced in N Magazine as Great Harbor's Great Cause?
Yeah, that was the kickoff project for them that started is they work with us to kind of get that going. I think they really saw the importance of having some, current baseline data in the harbor. And I think that, Tara and Steve and Steve Tettelbach and the rest of his team put together a really solid project that tied into a lot of work from the past through Mariah Mitchell. And put a lot of hard work in. And I think our crew last year kind of picking up where those guys left off and trying to replicate that so we can do it on a yearly basis and try it out. Really did an awesome job to do their best and do it. I think Tara will be the first to admit that, the old salty pros from Stony Brook certainly are like next level collectors of data in those things. But I think every year we do it, we get better, and it just gives us more information to help our programs at the hatchery, to help our programs on land-based projects for, where to target. And I think any of those projects are really beneficial. And, the Great Harbor Yacht Club really helped us out. And hopefully this next grant that we're applying for will give us another 2 years to cover and get started in Manicat. And then hopefully the town will pick it up from there, and it will just be, kind of what we do in September and into October every year is go out and collect data and monitor. And then, maybe we'll have discussions in the fall and the winter as with you guys, and talk about what we're seeing and results, and really start talking about a more active management of the fishery and what we're seeing. And, talking about, are there years where we might be able to have, limits go up? Are there years where, we really need to look at other areas? There are eelgrass sensitive areas, but to really have a conversation that's informed by really solid vetted data on a year-to-year basis, I think would be awesome. Be really great.
Okay, it's neat to tie that together and see that progress is being made on a promise. That's
Yeah.
nice.
I think it's really cool that they were able to tie in Peter Boyce's work that he and Bob Kennedy did MRI Mitchell for all those years. And I know they even look back as old as some of the work that Keith Conan and Tracy Curley did back in the Dave can probably speak to it well more than I can, back in the old days of doing some scallop surveys, and look at that and get some real value from that information too. So they really put together a nice program, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, moving into old business, the Oyster Lease permit review.
I think Dave had a comment quickly, sir.
Oh, Dave, I'm sorry. Mr. Franzuto.
Yeah, just Jeff, leave the word old out when you talk.
I was talking about Keith, so, who, by the way, did email me a couple weeks ago from he lives in London now, in London, England. So it was kind of fun to get some of that old stuff back out, or the stuff from the 90s and 2000s. Sorry, Dave.
Well, Dave, you're sporting a new generation, much younger sounding name tonight. So picture looks the same, but the name has changed. Okay.
My son spends more time on this than I do.
If there's nothing else for natural resources, moving forward into old business, the Oyster Lease permit review, Jeff, you can just simply jump right back in.
Sure. So I'll try to be brief. So I know I've been talked about, and I apologize for not getting this written up in advance. I ended up being away last week and just didn't get it done with everything happening. So just to kind of present it in an oral fashion, was able to go and meet with Ted out at his boat that he keeps out at Mitchell Coffins, and kind of take a look at the work that's done. I think we have some significant concerns that it's a boat that still doesn't really have, he has hydraulic haulers that he's installing, that none of them are installed. And the boat, by his own admission, is probably at least a month away still from being ready. And I feel like, kind of reviewing the minutes from when we first started talking about this and it first came up, and we're kind of almost sneaking up on a year that this discussion has been going on, that the boat has been a month away for 9 months now, and it just isn't progressing. And the stuff that's on the bottom is just going to be harder and harder to remove. And I just don't feel like we have any confidence that, the lease is going to be brought into compliance, or is going to be worked properly here going forward and in a timely manner. And I really feel like we've given a pretty fair opportunity to try to do that and make some significant progress. And I think, in our opinion, after kind of viewing it, we're just not seeing that progress get made in a manner that's kind of in keeping with the requirements of the lease and requirements with the regulations. So that's kind of where we're at. I know there's been some other concerns with people that have found gear that have washed up and will win it. I know Mr. Pronk brought that up at some point. And I just don't feel like we're ever going to get there to be back in compliance and back into the terms of the lease.
Mr. Sidlowski.
Jeff, I share your lack of confidence. I've been listening to Mr. Lambrecht for many months, and he's a nice guy, but there hasn't really been any significant progress in my estimation. So I understand where you're going with that.
Here comes Ted.
Okay.
Beautiful. Okay.
Hi, Ted. We were just discussing your progress and frankly, lack thereof, I guess. I still have a soft heart for you because I know how cold it is out a lot of times. But if there's something you'd like to add about, well, first of all, Mr. Carlson, when did you visit?
We went out, JC and I went out and took a look at Mr. Lambrecht's boat. I guess it would be 2 Thursdays ago. So it would have been the week before school break, towards the end of that week.
Mhm. Okay. Well, so far the discussion leading up tonight, Mr. Lambrecht, just to bring you a bit up to speed, is a little concerned. There's a little maybe a sign of lack of confidence, and so if there's some inspiring comments you'd like to make in your own behalf, I suppose now would be the time to do that.
I can't tell you anything inspiring. I've been working on this thing straight on through. In November or end of October, I blew out my shoulder. I've been fighting this thing. I've been working left-handed for 3 months. I had surgery 10 days ago, and this week's been a little bit slow. I can only just say that this is the only thing I've worked on all along, other than a couple of little minor caretaking things, and that I have people doing that for me. I just can't. I've put all my time and effort into this. I can't do any more than I'm doing.
Mhm.
I'm telling you, I fully intend to push on through, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay, so you're here to tell us that your interest is still in
100%. There's no doubt. I never did not have an interest. In
Gotcha.
the beginning, last spring, I could have gone out and pulled those cages, but I kept getting cut off and told not to go to it. I tore that son of a bitch and boat apart, and I'm putting it back together correctly, and I'm tweaking it as I go, and I can't do any more than that. You know what I mean? I honestly can't do any more than that. If I had been if someone would have let me do anything, even in the summer, I got the whole summer wide open. A plan was set up to start in April, pulling cages and stuff. And I said, don't work on it. Don't work on it. Don't work on it. I'm getting no response back until finally in August. I'm trying to find a little resolution to it. I want to get it done. And I have worked on that son of a gun since the way back in the middle of the summer, just going on and on. I tore that thing apart and I'm putting it back together. There's just nothing I can do. I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars into this and all my time, and I'm running out of money. I've got to, you got to make some kind of income. You know what I mean? At some point, but I fully intend to go at this full bore.
Okay, Ted. All right. Peter, I see a hand up, Mr. Brace.
Yes, couple of things. Ted, if we were to say to you, one more chance, when could you say that this boat is going into the water?
I can't give a specific date. I certainly hope by the end of this month.
But you can understand what the Natural Resources Department is up against, trying to get you to comply with the lease and the regulations.
I understand that that's what the issue is all along.
And so, it's if I could, I would try and get Jeff to give you a little bit more time, but then have a deadline where if you didn't have it done, then that's that, because you've had a lot of time, and I know you've had a lot of hardships along the way, but the stuff's on the bottom and we want to get it up
I
or
fully understand.
disintegrated. And then I want to say to Jeff, and I can't remember, I know I've asked this question before, but is there a waiting list of people that want his spot?
Sorry about that. So on our active waiting list, we have 2 individuals that we've checked in with in the last year that have still expressed at least some interest in getting involved.
Are they still, and when was the last time you had contact with them, Jeff?
The most recent one I've spoken to since the start of 2021.
And that person is still interested?
Yes.
Okay, so Ted, you've got someone standing in line behind you. So that's more than anything else, that should be your motivation. Of course, your motivation should be to get the cages off, but you're defending your spot. So you should be able to give this board and the Natural Resources Department a date certain that you're going to have it done, because
I won't have all those cages out March 31st. My intention is to have the boat in water and start the process. Now, as far as I know, I don't know, is there any more other open aquaculture spots in Nantucket? And are those, why does this other person check one of those spots out? And so forth and so on. But anyway, that's beside the point. My whole point is that I fully intend to go forward with it. I'm putting as much effort as I can put into it. I don't know where to go. I really, if I say March 31st, okay, that's what it is. But that's all I can do is just push to get towards that end. Like, I'm not magic. I can't do magic.
Ted, you've explained yourself enough at this point. I had the same question you started off with about any other available acreage out there, and I'd like Mr. Carlson to have a chance to answer that.
So up in the head of the harbor, all those spots are either taken or in use potentially for town sites that we reserve. Where Mr. Lambrick's leases are currently, all the other leases up in the head of the harbor are currently actively being worked.
Okay.
How about at any other place on the island in Nantucket?
So the only other areas that are qualified for aquaculture, just to run through them all, is up in Cascada, which is actively being worked. And that area is taken. There's the overwintering sites on the head of the harbor, which are all under active leases. There's the Pocomo Meadows sites, which there is 2 private individuals and 1 town spot, where the town spot really isn't even very viable anymore. It's kind of been sanded in, that those 2 individuals are also working. And then there's some small spots in Pulpus Harbor that we've looked into before. I know we've done some growth studies out there for the town and held some stuff on behalf of the town on those sites. But those sites aren't really currently permitted for full use. They'd have to go through the full process.
Any other board members, questions or comments? Mr. Brace?
I guess this is for both Jeff and for Ted. Is it conceivable that Ted could work with somebody else, with another oysterman, to just get the cages off the bottom and comply with what the town wants him to comply with, giving him then more time to work on his boat?
Well,
is that a possibility?
The whole point is I got to get this son of a gun in the water. It's set up for doing just this purpose. I don't know how anybody else is going to get them off the bottom. I mean, what procedure they're going to use. I've got a substantial plan on getting them up and out and all that stuff. I just, I don't know. I do have, I have set, I've got Sean Fitzgibbon is interested in, and he's got another person as well. And we're working towards working out a summer program and all that stuff. I mentioned that to Jeff earlier. I've put him onto my state permit as far as a person that's going to be working on those leases as well, and so forth and so on.
And so, sorry,
We're
one more
working through
question.
that process with Sean.
One more question for Jeff. Let's say, let's say, you know, this person who's on the waiting list can get going right now. Wouldn't he need the cages off the bottom anyway to get going? So that needs to be done before this person gets going. And what time of the year does this person? What time does an oysterman need to get going to start his lease? What's the optimal window, I guess?
I would say to kind of answer that really briefly is obviously they'd want the stuff removed. It's part of the obligation of the lease is to have that clear. Or if you end up transferring or taking possession of that lease, you also kind of inherit the problems that go with it. So someone would be able to do that obviously themselves if that lease transferred somehow. As far as getting into the water, I mean, I think those guys like to get in and get going as soon as possible, as soon as weather permitting is there. Not to put her on the spot, I think Tara is a far better person to answer the optimal time of year to start putting out new seed and new gear into the water to make sure that it was growing properly. But I mean, I know, we'll probably start to see Matt and Simon and Chuck and Mac and the whole group up there up in as soon as the weather really is permitting for them to get up and start to move their gear around. So,
I'm
and the kind of in a,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, and kind of in addition to, it's stuff too, where with new folks too, we've also kind of since the program started, we've talked to Shab and we've kind of had a moratorium on starting people with full acreage and kind of ramping up and building up. So we can make sure that people have a sustainable program so that, it's obviously something if someone new was coming in to take into consideration as well is making sure that they can work and do it because really, what starts the whole process for us and even talking about revocation, and trust me when I say it's the least favorite part of what any of us get to do from time to time is you don't work the lease for 3 years. And you have a couple of years where you get a pass for, whether it's personal or environmental or something that goes on where you're not able to work the lease. And, the way the regulations are crafted is that's kind of understood that that's going to happen from time to time. All of us have challenges that happen. But what starts the revocation process is a pattern of inactivity and a pattern of not working the leases and keeping them in compliance for a pretty good period of time. So, as much as I understand and I'm sympathetic, and like I said, it's not a process we like to engage in. It's also something that is very slow to initiate on purpose to allow for things to take place and allow for real life to happen, and understanding that those things change, but it's the pattern of not working it correctly. I mean, the last revocation we did was for a different leaseholder who for hook or by crook managed to skate by and was inactive on his lease for over a decade, and that permit ended up getting revoked. And we obviously still see issues up in Pocomo where there's still gear left from when Mr. Holgate had the leases there. There's still the barge in that, and that's what we want to prevent, because if that stuff sits and it stays, and I understand people's intentions to remove it, but the longer it sits and the longer it stays, the harder it gets, the more damage it does when it's removed, or it becomes a permanent problem and it's a permanent fixture to wherever it is. And that's not just, for Mr. Lambert's gear, that's for anyone's gear for that matter, for aquaculture purposes. And that's our concern. And that's our task at the department, is to make sure that opportunity is being stewarded at the highest level possible and the level that the leases and the expectations of the town and the permits demand. And that's, kind of where we are. And I understand people want to give more time, but from our end, there needs to be an end so we can start anew if necessary, or the town can take measures to remove the gear ourselves and then deal with the consequences of that after. So that's kind of where we're at.
Tara, did you have something to add about, when the active oystermen have been getting started and moving seed in?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions like that. But yeah, I think April 15th is kind of the magic date for when the gear comes up, and it gets set down on December 15th. But there are two different times during the season when it's advantageous to get oyster seed. And usually you want to get it first thing in the spring when your gear comes up, so it has a chance to grow before the rust tide sets in August. Because if your oysters are smaller than, like, I don't know, 15 millimeters, then they're not going to survive as well through that rust tide if it happens to bloom up in the head of the harbor. So what a lot of farmers have been doing also is buying their seed after August and buying bigger seed so that you didn't miss that growing season. And it's more expensive to buy seed that way, but you avoid the potential pitfalls of the Cochleodinium bloom. So I know a lot of people, either buy all their stuff in the spring and get it big enough, or they buy it in the fall, or they do a little bit of both for insurance purposes, just to make sure that they have what they need.
Board members, anybody else?
I'd like to say that I want to reiterate that those cages would have come up this summer had I been allowed. And I ordered seed this summer and paid for it, which is still paid for, but I can't get it. I can't get refund on it, but I can get seed for the spring, which all I have to do is give them the date, but I can't do that until I'm allowed to go forward with working on it. Now, obviously, maybe it was a mistake for me to fix that and make it work right, better, or in a situation that was going to work better for me. Maybe that was my big mistake. And jumping into that in August, by then I figured, well, what the heck? I can't put seed out. I can't do anything. I may as well fix this right. And gutted that thing out. And I'm going to tell you, them cages have been up by now. Had I been allowed to work on it.
And what, can you be specific, please, on what stopped you from working? I'm sorry.
So
I had a notification from the resource department that I was not to go out onto the lease or touch anything. From the spring on, I got return receipt letters sent out. I got all kinds of notifications asking to find some way to resolve that so I could, do that. And it kept putting off and putting off and putting off until finally in August, something finally broke.
Mr. Carlson, can you add into this?
No, I'll definitely reiterate. I mean, we issued the potential revocation letter to Mr. Lambert. I wish I had it in front of me right now to get the exact dates, and asked for nothing to change until the matter was resolved. As far as I know, and maybe Mr. Lambert can answer, if his boat was in the water and ready in the spring.
It was ready to go in the spring. It was ready to go to do that. It pieces of a beat. I wanted to make it more efficient by moving you saw it, moving the whole culling board, opening the deck up, opening up the culling board, putting in a new fuel tank, all the way down the line to make it more efficient to accomplish the job that I had at that point in time.
So,
and that's what I did.
Again, I mean, we may agree to disagree, and that's
Sure.
fine. But I would say again, from our end and the natural resources end, it's not something where it was a 1 year and we're making a decision. Again, it's the regulations specifically call for a period of inactivity that was
I understand that
was documented, and the lease wasn't being worked. And it's our obligation by the regulations to pursue. The regulations call for us to pursue revocation. So we provided you notice that was the process, and that's the process that we're still going through. And
I made that plea with you at that point in time, trying to explain. Of course, you couldn't get through to anybody there, but trying to explain to you at that point in time what my situation was, and that I did fully intend to go forward, because you said it indicated to you that I did not intend to do anything with it, which wasn't true. And there's nothing more I could do at that point. I could have gone out. I could have dumped the boat, gone out there and done that, and then had my ass kicked for doing it. You know what I mean?
No, I-
Mr. Lambrecht, can you tell me, back at that time in August, did you have operable haulers mounted in your
Oh,
boat?
everything was operable in April. When I had first intended the whole setup, I
'Cause I'm feeling some kind of conflicted information because all this time I felt you've been working on the boat and it hasn't been ready.
correct. In midsummer, I made the decision to gut it and change the configuration at that point in time. Prior to that point in time, all those haulers and everything else were working. Everything was working.
And the boat was seaworthy.
The boat was seaworthy. It still is seaworthy.
Well, I know,
could I
I
ask-
mean, also in the near past, there were times when it was just simply too cold for you to be doing gel coat work. So.
Well,
I'm just
that was
trying-
way a
I'm
long
just
time
trying-
ago.
I'm sorry?
That was a long time ago. That's been done. We've carried forward from there.
Okay, but it was after August. It was
Yes, it was.
this
It was. Yep.
recent fall, and so I'm
Yep.
just trying to paint the picture so that the rest of the board can understand, because
Yeah.
it seemed like some parts were missing in the middle there for us.
If I could ask for some clarification, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bossy, please.
If the boat was in working condition and in the water in spring and up till midsummer, why wasn't it in use for that period and the 2 years before that? I'm not talking about when the stop work issue order or letter was sent. I'm concerned about the 2 or 3 years before that where it wasn't working.
The boat was available and could have been worked. I had to move. We lost our housing. We moved 4 times in that time period. I had to shift that gear. I've got gear all over the place, all over this island. Shifted, and I pay rent every month. I pay thousands of dollars a month rent to store that gear and the boat and everything else, moving back and forth, keep the logistics of all that together and still have enough income to stay alive. I had to do something, you know what I mean? So every time you move all that stuff everywhere, every time you move your household, Christ, my wife had to move off island. My daughter had to move island. I'm living out in a freaking truck for 6 months till I can find affordable housing. It's shifting back and forth. It was just went crazy. And that's the reason why in the interim there, the things got screwed up. I did not intend to even not go at it in the spring of the following season. I put down 200,000 oysters that were ready to go. That's just the 200,000 are ready to go, not the seed from that year, the seed from the previous year. So there's a lot of stuff gear down. There's a lot of there. I doubt very seriously the oysters are there still, but you know what I mean? It's just, it was a bad set of circumstances that put me into the position. I had fully intended to go forward with it. I don't know what more to say. I honestly.
Well, that's, you've said plenty, Mr. Lambrecht. Thank you. Any other board members have something they'd like to add?
I just had a question for Jeff.
Mr. Brace.
In the beginning of the revocation process, why is it part of the protocol to just tell him to not to do anything? If you wanted the stuff off the bottom and his boat was running, wouldn't it be prudent to have him remove the stuff, since you're going to revoke his lease, and that's what you want, so that you can have it out of there, so someone else can go in there? I don't know. I'm sorry. I just wanted to understand, Jeff. That's all.
Sure. So I can answer that question. There's actually a pretty reasonable answer for that. Going through the last revocation process that we did, one of the issues that we had is after we provided a revocation notice for inactivity, very similar to this, the individual that we had before ended up going out and like buying seed and putting cages out in the water after they got the notice to try to make it look like they had been working the lease. And so we took it on advice from town council to say, when you issue out a revocation notice, tell them to stop work so those conditions cannot change. So that way you don't have the situation where someone will come back in and say, no, I've been working the lease. See, I have cages in the water. I have things that are there. To avoid that very situation is to kind of freeze it in time, and everyone's playing from that. So there's not things that are going on around to make it a more confusing situation. So that's the guidance that we took. And I guess, if it would be helpful for everybody, we're happy to put together a kind of a timeline of events for folks, kind of from the initiation of even the leases to current, just for people to see if it would be helpful for everyone, just to kind of go through it. So whatever you guys would like, if you need more information, again, I think our position is clear that, we feel that the regulation's been met, that the lease hasn't been sufficiently worked even prior to the last year when we had stopped work for the necessary period of time, and feel that the lease isn't properly in compliance and the requirements of the leases aren't properly being followed.
I still think, I don't know, I'm probably the only one on the board that thinks this, but I still think you can pull it off. I see your point, Mr. Carlson, but I happen to know Mr. Lambrecht's wife. I know the situation that they were in when they had to move out and she had to move off island. And I know that hardship intimately from my own experiences. And with respect to what the town council said in regard to that person, and I know who you're talking about because I went through that process of revoking that guy's permit. It sounds like it could be interpreted as subjective because each individual Oyster person is going to be different. And I know the individual you're talking about, and I know that he is someone who would do that. And Ted, you could look at him and say he wouldn't do that. I don't know. It's a gray area, or whatever. I'm just thinking that if he had a little bit more time, if Ted could say, all right, by the middle of April, I'm going to have it all up. And if not, Ted would have to accept the fact that the hammer's coming down and this other person is coming in, or the end of March, or I don't know.
Can I make a suggestion?
Danny?
Yep.
Mr. Prawn? Speak.
In fairness to everybody, this is just my personal opinion. I say we give them a date of April 15th. If there's no progress, Shab as a board would have no other choice than to stand behind what the Natural Resource Department would say. No disrespect to Mr. Lambrecht. I understand your situation and all, but you're kicking the can down the road. It's time to pass the torch on. If you can't do it, step aside and let somebody else who has the means to do it go ahead. That's my personal thoughts.
And I'd
Mr.
like to follow up
Bossy.
with Dan. Thank you. I agree with Dan, and I agree with his date. And I think the measure has to be equipment being lifted from the bottom.
Well,
with Mr. Lambrecht's boat or with another boat. It's got to start coming off the bottom.
It will be started off the bottom. I can't guarantee you it will be finished off the bottom. In other words, it's a process. I could, if I had lifted 10 cages last week, I would give you an exact figure about how long it would take to get them off. It all just matters on the complications that are involved.
I think in all honesty,
right.
this board and Jeff may disagree, but I think in all honesty, this board just wants to see it start coming off the bottom and continue to come off the bottom without stopping.
That's why I say a firm date, April 15th. It's a month and a half away. If a cage hasn't come off the bottom by April 15th, show's over. Pull the plug.
There you go. Bingo.
Mr. Carlson, please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we started this process and, we even detailed and drafted a potential timeline for this to happen. Obviously, we want the lease to be worked in compliance in there. I mean, I just don't want to be back in the situation again if it comes up as well. I mean,
Well, Jeff, can I interject for a second? That's
Sure.
why I say April 15th. You'll
All right,
have
we-
our blessing.
Yeah,
know-
we've got that, Dan, and I think the entire board would probably agree with that. I, uh, I, I, I admire Mr. Lambrecht's encouragement in his voice and his looks that he truly wants to, finally get his boat in the water and move forward with this. I see March as a very difficult month for getting certain things done, weather permitting, but at the same time, in putting everything together with what Mr. Carlson has to add, with what Tara has added, I was thinking the same thing with April 15th. I want to hear what the rest of the board has to say. The ultimate decision is Mr. Carlson's, and Mr. Carlson has not mentioned whether he's has paperwork ready and has a date of his own in mind. Ultimately, this decision is Mr. Carlson's, and we're in the position to not only support Mr. Carlson, but try to support Mr. Lambrecht as well. And so I'm hoping we work as a mediator in a way, and hopefully progress is made where this can just all be put behind us. So I'd love to hear from Mr. Brace has his hand up.
So since I'm the progenitor of this idea, giving them a little bit more time, I'd just have to kick in a caveat or two, which would be, it can't be by April 15th that he's pulled one cage up. He has to be actively pulling cages up. It has to be, getting going, getting on it, because he's going to work that and put his oysters in and work his area. And, if it doesn't look like he's hard at it and working toward working that lease, then we say, okay, I'm sorry, but Jeff has to do his thing. And then the other thing is, I guess to Tara, is April 15th too late if Jeff decides to revoke the lease and then that next person is going to start up?
Start by then. They gotta acquire equipment. They have no experience.
I was hoping that Tara, I'm sorry, Ted, I was hoping that Tara would answer that question.
Yes.
I don't really know, because I'm not familiar with the person that is next in line to know what their experience is, as far as the waiting list goes. But I think anytime you start an oyster farm, it's just not a turnkey situation. It takes a lot of time to figure things out and to get your gear together. So, I think whoever signed up for this probably knows that, and they'll probably just be happy if there's something available.
I personally, well, go ahead, Mr. Carlson.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple points for clarity. One, that the decision isn't mine to make, right? Is the license and the lease is issued by the Board of Selectmen. So if the permit's going to be revoked, it takes a vote of the Board of Selectmen to do. The procedure that they've installed from the last time, again, is to first come to SHAB. You guys are obviously their advisory board for all things harbor and shellfish. That's why we're here. Our role in the Natural Resources Department is just to monitor for compliance, and when there are issues, to properly bring them forward and properly provide notice. But I don't get to go into work on April 16th and revoke a permit. That's not the process that's in place. So there obviously has to be the select board input that's there. So it's not that it's a quick unilateral decision. Again, we initiate the process because, again, I think we've outlined pretty clearly we feel that the lease wasn't properly being worked in the time frame required, and that's why we're here. But that's not mine. So that's part of the process that we're in, to kind of continue with what someone new would have to do. Someone new also still has to get, they obviously may not have invested the time into getting all of the permits that they need. They need to get a permit from the state, from the DMF. They need a permit from the Army Corps. The only way to really expedite that process to some degree is to go through kind of a formal transfer process, very similar to what we saw with when Gordon transferred his licenses to Mac Wraith. and transferred through, and the Army Corps was able to roll those permits to a new individual through that agreement, and that's something that they're able to do. That's about the fastest way to get through that process. Other than that, you're applying from scratch.
2-year process.
Jeff, I want to thank you for clarifying the procedural methodology there. And
Can I say something, Andy?
you needed to hear that as well. I want to hear from Mr. Franzuto next.
Yep. Ted,
Sure.
when was the last time you harvested shellfish from your lease?
The December of the year that they went down, which is, that was the
December-
beginning,
What year?
that following spring, I 2 years ago, 2.5, 3. That would be almost 3 years now is the last time I harvested. I would assume.
Mr. Pronk?
On a
I
commercial
just-
basis.
My thoughts are that whoever is next in line to get it would be happy to get it at any point. If they've been waiting this long to get it, you know, any date would be sufficient for them, you know. I'm sure it's quite a permitting process. I wouldn't know, but
Minimum of a year permitting process.
well, Ted, that's not really your concern. It's their
No, it
concern.
isn't. No, I went through it. It took me 2 years.
No,
Yeah.
I'm sure it did, but you know,
All
like I
right.
said,
If I
stand-
may, I personally don't believe that the next person in line should be having an effect on what we're talking about right now. Really, the issue before us is Mr. Lambrecht moving forward in a time frame that satisfies all parties here at this moment. And as far as what happens in the future, that happens after a date that we come up with, and whether we were, I don't know if Mr. Carlson has a date in mind. I think Mr. Lambrecht needs a date hanging over his head, I believe, and so far from at least 4 of us, I've heard April 15th. Mr. Franzuto, would you like to add?
Yeah, to your point, I agree. I don't think someone in the queue should drive this process.
No.
But understand that it is a lengthy process, and unless that person has started that process already, and he shouldn't have or couldn't have because he didn't have a lease, that acreage is going to sit dormant until someone gets qualified, or at least next spring.
Mhm.
So to your point, Mr. Chairman, that the issue has to be get the stuff off the bottom. So next spring, all going well for the next person, he could be able to go in there and start the process. Gear has to get off the bottom. So you, Jeff, you were asked, do you have a date in mind?
It seems like the board is April 15th. That's a month and a half away. I guess from our end, if that's the date that's set, I mean, I think that's fine, but that has to be the end. So we can either move this process forward and we're not still talking about it, a month from now or 2 months from now, because we've been talking about it here for, the better part of 6 months. So it needs to move forward.
Can I step in here for a second?
Mr. Pronk?
I say the April 15th deadline, insufficient progress being made. That satisfies the Natural Resource Department, the Board of Selectmen, and the SHAB Board as well. Like if the boat goes in the water April 14th, that's not going to cut it. I agree. Something should be actively happening by the 15th. If there's not sufficient to everybody, then show's over. And as SHAB, we should stand behind that and go with Natural Resource Department to where they need to go with it.
Thank you, Dan.
Mr. Chairman,
Ginger, please.
Well, I kind of support the April 15th date. You know, I've been listening to Mr. Lambert for several months with, you know, magic month, it'll be done. So I have to confess a certain amount of skepticism there. On the other hand, from Mr. Carlson's point, I think it's kind of a hard decision to make between what's working the lease and pretending to work the lease, but not really working it. I feel that's kind of a squishy area, and but I would support an April 15th, you know, cutoff to get something truly going, unless there's some other extenuating circumstance. I mean, we can't predict the weather. March and April are the worst months here to get anything done, as you pointed out, and the battery in my phone is just about to die, so I may be leaving you unexpectedly at any point, but that's what I say.
Thank you, Ginger. Mr. Carlson, I do not want to, I don't want the board to be putting the cart before the horse and creating a date that may not have been, you know, satisfactory in your mind. So, you know, just share with us what you came into this meeting with on your mind to move forward with.
Sorry about that. I mean, I think I said it earlier. I mean, I think the concerns that we've all talked about is, you know, making progress and getting there. And again, it's something that when we review the regulations and review people's leases, is you see the pattern of inactivity for a number of years before you start the revocation process. So I think from our end is we haven't seen satisfactory work that led to the gear that's you know, kind of attached to the bottom and is in tough shape and is frankly going to be very difficult to remove, probably just for the amount of growth and things that are on there. That we just want to have leases that, whether it's to the next person or whoever, is in good condition, and that our leases and the conditions of the leases that people agree to are maintained, and what people agree to is what is followed. And I think in our case, we don't feel that to date those conditions are being met, and that's why we are pursuing revocation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Lambrecht, are you going to be prepared to have a diver deployed? It sounds like it may be a fragile situation there, and I'm just curious, you know, if you'll be prepared to have all hands on deck when you're ready to get in the water with your boat.
Well, if need be, I've never had a diver before, so
Uh-huh.
I've never used a diver. I mean, I do it a little bit different than a lot of these fellows do it, but that's me.
Well, I'm just from what I've learned a little bit over this course of time, it sounds like your gear is kind of attached to the bottom, and I'm concerned about how you pull and tug at that, and if it's going to separate and come apart and end up being kind of debris stuck to the bottom. Am I
If need be.
imagining something that's impossible, or?
No, it's not impossible. And if need be, I'll have someone dive. I have no problem with that. I've got 2 or 3 people that would be more than willing.
All right. The reason I'm bringing it up is just so you have your ducks in order. Your time is dwindling, and I think we've really. You said you were hoping to have the boat in the water by the end of this month.
Yes.
And we've added 15 days to that to hopefully make some progress that satisfies natural resources and beyond. I don't know if this is something we need to take a vote on tonight. If the board would like to, I'll certainly entertain that to make it more of a solidified decision. If not, our next meeting is. Yes, Mr.
I'm sorry, I'd like to propose a motion. I know Mr. Carlson doesn't need our blessing to go forward, but I don't see this board doing anything before the 15th. I'd like to make a motion that we do vote on this, and that April 15th is a hard date for this board to come back and make a decision with Mr. Carlson's input too, by the way, that whether significant progress is made, significant progress being equipment off the bottom. and coming steadily off the bottom. That's my
I'll
motion.
second it.
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, a motion's been made by Mr. Bossy to set a date of April 15th to have progress that's satisfactory. Mr. Pronk actually seconded it first. Discussion on the motion, Mr. Franzuto.
Yeah, with it clearly stated that with sufficient progress determined by the Natural Resource Department by April 15th, otherwise the lease is terminated, or the recommendation from this board will be to the Natural Resources Department to go to the Board of Selectmen and revoke the lease.
Mr. Brace.
I just want to make the point that it's important that we do take a vote.
Most definitely.
That we do take a vote because either way, it's going to be a report to the Board of Selectmen, and Jeff is going to need to be able to say, the SHAB board voted this way. This is what they said. And, you know, we support the revocation if the work hasn't been done. We also, at this juncture, support giving him one more try, and it should be something that's on the record, not just a discussion we had and then, okay, Ted, go and do it. This way, it as an advisory board, it puts it on the record. You know, we've said you've got till the 15th. So,
Mr. Sidlowski.
My concern is that Ted is not the only person with a lease. I think that as we keep extending this, I think we run the risk of making it more difficult for the town when they have another person who may have a problem with their lease acting expeditiously. So I think we need to consider the fact that the town has to deal with the leases, and this could affect their ability to deal with other potential people who are in violation of their leases in the future.
That's wonderful. I think I've heard from every board member. I appreciate all the support and moving forward with this. Mr. Carlson, anything more you'd like to add before we continue with this motion?
No, I think the only thing I'd add is all of our other leaseholders are currently in compliance to Mr. Solowski's comment a minute ago.
Okay. So the motion's been made and seconded to set a date of April 15th to see satisfactory progress from Mr. Lambrecht. Otherwise, we will be in support of Mr. Carlson moving forward with a revocation. Mr. Brace, you can word that as it was proposed by Mr. Bossy from the minutes, please. And but meantime, the motion's been made and seconded, made by Mr. Bossy, seconded by Mr. Pronk. All in favor in a roll call fashion. Mr. Sidlowski?
No,
No.
I don't approve the motion, but it'll pass by a majority anyway, but I'm going to vote no.
Mr. Franzuto?
Aye, but to Tom's point, we should have done this, 4 or 5 months ago. We kept extending, hoping something was going to happen, and now we're in this situation, but I'll vote aye.
Okay. Ms. Andrews?
I vote aye.
Mr. Brace? You are off tape there.
aye.
And chair votes aye. So we have one dissension, Mr. Sadowski. Thank you for that. If there's nothing more on this matter, I'll move forward.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the discussion.
Yes. If you could stay with us, Mr. Carlson, quickly, if you would.
Yeah, certainly.
On our next topic, excessive sand and scallops, more about the second portion dredging plan. Just curious, we've been talking about this for quite some time as well, and I realize this is a much more difficult subject as far as permitting and whatnot goes. And I've advocated kind of since I got on the board almost 6 years ago about dredging, maintenance dredging. There's also been discussion where, Mr. Carlson, you were at a meeting where at the time Cormac Collier was on the Land Council talking about the Eelgrass pilot project off of Huzzy Shoal. And I had mentioned eelgrass being able to grow in the granular sand that's washing off the beaches and filling up the harbors. He said, no, it needs more of a muddy base for its root system. And I recall you, Mr. Carlson, chiming in saying that you've had reports from people who set moorings. They used to set them in 6 feet of water, and some are in as little as 4 feet of water in the same location years later. Every time I bring up dredging, I feel like I'm bringing up an issue that's looked at as very extreme and drastic. I did finally explain with questioning from Mr. Franzuto recently that I was thinking more of a very, a test pilot program, comparing to, if you've ever watched Bering Sea Gold, and how a single individual man is actually kneeling on the bottom with a hydraulic suction tube, something of that manner, where maybe a 300 by 300 foot square could be tested to hydraulically remove the sand. Maybe, he's got hands on, so he sees the muddy base here and moves on. Just curious if this is, something that is possible to move forward with in a pilot program type manner to see if it can help shellfish bed enhancement and improvement of eelgrass production. You have told us, that a dredging maintenance plan has been in the works. I realize this is something really totally different than a dredging maintenance plan as far as navigable waters. So anything you can add to this for us tonight, Mr. Franzuto, or I'm sorry, Mr. Carlson.
If Dave wants to add something, I certainly won't stop him.
Well, Jeff,
That was
so you know-
that was just a slip. I haven't seen his hand up yet.
no, what I did, Jeff, was I talked to McKenna.
Yep.
And I talked to these other shellfish guys, which prompted this whole invitation to the Eelgrass Forum later this month.
Yes.
And Jeff, McKenna felt that a collaboration with us for a pilot program with the eelgrass guys to do some sand removal before planting, to do a section, I don't know, 30 feet square, whatever. But that a pilot program could probably be permitted as long as we collaborated with the eelgrass guys. And the eelgrass guys that I talked to said that that's a novel idea that I don't think it's ever been tried. So I think it's something that could get permitted on a trial basis. And Tara's working with Land Council on eelgrass. This might be a good way to do this. That's
I think
that's kind of where we were headed.
Yeah, I think just to kind of hop in and just to let you know some of the things that we've been talking about, I think any opportunity we have to explore enhancing eelgrass habitat in particular is always good. And talking about doing some small dredging stuff, I think is really interesting. I think it's worthwhile to also talk about when we talk about those, even like alternative moorings that we don't talk about that often, or possibilities for looking into other technologies there too. But I think to kind of answer the more global question for you, Mr. Lowell, one of the things that we've been looking at and actually have been putting a scope together in developing a dredge plan isn't just looking at dredging as a sense of maintenance for navigable channels, but also looking how sediment moves through the harbor, right? And looking at it at a sediment transport sense and seeing where it's coming and going and the rates that it's coming or going. So when we're selecting dredging sites and then also selecting potential spoil sites, we're picking spots where the sand is going to move and not shoal up over existing eelgrass habitat, right away, or doing things that are, kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face a little bit in those areas. And as we've seen some of those areas, I mean, I think the best example of a little bit of knowledge would have been helpful at the time, as we spent a lot of time and effort dealing with eelgrass over in the Monomoy area. And that happens to be an area at the time that was accumulating a lot of sediment, and we saw a pretty significant buildup and that eelgrass get smothered. I think having a better idea about how sand is moving in general in our harbor and in Madaket Harbor and even around the island can help fuel that discussion better, to know, hey, if we're going to be doing these transplanting areas, or if we're going to try something and we're going to move, a 30 by 30 area and take up sand for eelgrass restoration, we can pick the best spot to do that, where we're not going to be back doing maintenance as quickly as possible. So I think that's that. I mean, I think the guy, and I wish he was here because he talked about it to no end. I know Dave knows him pretty well, but the guy that we've really talked to a lot about it is a guy out of the Center of Coastal Studies named Mark Borelli, who I know he did some story type pathway stuff for us, but he's been really into sediment transport studies for towns. The Cape has had a lot of really great success for their beach nourishment programs, and through the National Seashore, identifying like nodal points and how to do nourishment, where they've, instead of putting nourishment on beaches in a consistent volume, do a kind of a percentage volume, because it gives them a more even exposure at the end, the way that sand transports. And the study that he did provides the math behind that. And it's something that we, think can really apply to our dredge plan. And I've seen that in some other communities as well. So if you like, we have kind of a really rough scope. If you want to see it, I can send it to you guys to look at, and kind of proposal that Mark put together a couple years for us that we've been kind of knocking around. So you can kind of see it in a little bit more detail, but I think that will really tackle it. And I think with that, your, suggested programs would fit right within some of the ideas of doing that sediment movement study with that information. So I think it's totally worthwhile.
Yeah.
That was a really excessively long answer to that question, but I wanted to make sure
No,
you
not
guys,
you, Jeff. Not
you
you.
guys, you guys got enough information from me.
I'll tell you guys, Borelli's pretty darn smart guy.
He's far smarter than me in explaining that.
And
So
me.
I kind of hacked it together, but it's good.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That goes a long way. Board members, any additional questions, comments? When you first mentioned, Mr. Carlson, studying the movement of sand, and you mentioned where spoils would be deposited, the first thing that I thought in my mind was an in-harbor deposit. Are you looking more into on land deposit of spoils?
I think it depends, right? And I think what we're looking at is, in this kind of new world of coastal resiliency and sea level rise, is obviously, as we're looking for, potential ways to adapt areas or protect areas, if you're going to use some sort of coastal engineering structure, obviously you need some sort of nourishment volume to then replicate the sand that would be coming out, even in the inner harbor, right? As we usually think of that stuff for the eastern shore and the southern shore, but it's still just as important here. So having that available and knowing what's going on, and I think we really started to kind of hit the tip of the iceberg on this with the coastal management plan, when we were looking at the inner harbor and some of those areas and the projects that we did up in Quays, up at the Chuck Rose there, and some of the nourishment that went there has really paid off in protecting that area. And I think it's just having that understanding of knowing where it's going to go and what you're going to be impacting, because you obviously don't want to, cover up the Cobble Bottom in some of the areas around Pocomo, where that's a really great habitat, or you don't want to be smothering eelgrass, but in some areas that sand is really critical to help maintain and help protect the beach and protect protect from erosion or flooding events. So it's really just getting more information to make better decisions is really what we're hoping to do.
Mr. Franzuto?
And you always have the option of storing it and selling it, or storing it and using it for future projects. So because you have the permits in place to do that now. So you got a lot of good options. You don't have to quickly identify a disposal site that may be too expensive to pump to or whatever, but you got quite a bit of options right now.
Yeah. And I think one of the things too that's nice about having all of those options is you don't get kind of put in a box where, to kind of live through the Pulpus Harbor dredging that just happened again recently, is you're relying upon private homeowners to sign on to easements to do it. And it's just be difficult to negotiate those. And some people don't want it, some people do. And you're up against this permitted spoil site and you can't get the permissions to do it. And now you're stuck. And that's where I think a lot of good things happen for being able to store and have like a little on-island sandbank, and that material end up getting sold for other projects. But I think that, lessons learned from that is get as many options as you can and get as many sites as you can. And then you can make the best decision at the time for where you're seeing impacts or you're not. And really just having as many tools as possible is really hopefully the end goal of all of that.
Okay, and there's certainly a lot of options. I mean, I'm looking at it, in a very simple-minded way. We see a lot of erosion all the way around the harbor from Washington Street, as I've said before, Monomoy, Quays, Pocomo, and all the way around to the first point of Cotu. And all this sand, in my eyes, is still in the harbor versus eastern shore or southern shore erosion can travel all the way around the island. Now, certainly I realize some can travel out through the channel, but I can't imagine nearly as much as what has come off of all these shorelines has traveled outside the harbor. And if a test site were to be done specifically for eelgrass, I would like to think that, some homeowners from the past who simply do not want to sign off. Let's try to figure out a site in front of a homeowner's property who's willing to sign on where it can benefit with coastal resiliency, or where it also won't. I don't see Ginger on here anymore. So in her behalf, she's always been concerned, and rightfully so, about the little critters that live on the beach. And if we go and bury this beach with spoils from in the harbor, what's happening to the little critters that live in the sand on the beach? And with all due respect to Ginger, that's why I bring it up. And that's why we have natural resources and town biologists to be able to help us with those decisions. So it's up to you guys really to do all this studying. Come to us, let us know what you think is the best way to go to it. I'm glad to hear that progress is being made. You're hearing us, and you're putting together all this information to come out with the right project with all the right tools to do it with. So thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Any other board members, any more discussion on this, or staff, if you have anything you'd like to add, Ms. Riley or Jeff? Okay. Next item is abandoned boats in the harbor. We just kept this on here in case there was anything more. Mr. Franzuto wasn't at the last meeting. That was my reason for keeping this on. If I forget what else we discussed about Mr. Brace when we were making this agenda. If there was anything else we needed to discuss, if Sheila wanted to come in and talk about it anymore, but we pretty much covered it all at the last meeting. I think Mr. Franzuto, you got a chance to listen to the recording of the meeting. Is there anything you'd like to say in public?
No, I did listen to it, and I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Other board members, Mr. Carlson.
I was just gonna say for interested parties, one of them, the boat that's been on the shore in Quays is in the process of leaving.
Great. Great.
The homeowners there had to come in for a Concom permit, and the Concom was very convincing that boat needed to disappear. So it should be
Okay.
on its way out. They were going to try to float it off, but Chris Fuller was not able to. The sand wouldn't support the boat to get it out to the water enough, so they have come in for some other permits to remove it via land over the
Oh,
property that's there, but it should hopefully be gone, hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
interesting. Okay. Do they have some minimal impact equipment to access?
I think they're just gonna haul it up and over the bank and then across the property and then essentially load it into the construction dumpster on the site for the construction that's happening there. So
Okay.
you're gonna remove the mast first though to make it easier, but they're essentially just gonna pick it and haul it. So
Okay.
might have to do some brush cutting to get it, or they may just try to drag it over the top of it, which is fine as well. So
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that addition of information there, Mr. Carlson. If there's nothing else in the abandoned boat matter, not seeing any hands or blinking lights or anything, our fairly new topic on our agenda, health of the harbors. I have nothing to add yet. The NSA has not met, the Nantucket Shellfish Association, about which at our next meeting, I will find out more about getting stickers for dumpsters for hazardous waste not to be put in dumpsters at job sites. We've had excessive lawn fertilizer use in here, simply kind of inspired by Ms. Andrews saying, in a jokingly manner, really, saying we ought to have a Lawns of Shame program, which always makes me laugh when I think about it. It's sad, but you have to laugh instead of cry. So I see so many lawns turning blue. They're fertilized so well, they're not just green anymore, they're blue. And any progress, Mr. Carlson, if you're still with us, that we may be interested in knowing about with the fertilizer program.
sure, I still am here. I just turned off my video because my battery is running low. So yeah, why don't I don't want to hold it up. Why don't I'll just provide kind of a written update to you guys and I'll just send it around and you can kind of see where you are. And then if people have questions, they can either ask or get back in touch. So then I can have a kind of a complete set of information for you guys.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members on this subject? Not seeing any. We have no.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brace.
something I forgot to put underneath the heading of health of the harbors was Leah Hill's request that we keep on the agenda going forward the FDA mooring field closure thing that is supposed to happen this summer, where there are 20 or more moorings and you won't be able to scratch for quahogs or other clams. And since she was saying that that was a developing situation, she wanted to have that remain on the agenda.
Okay.
Maybe Tara has something to add to that, but I think going forward we should have that on there.
Yeah, I think it should remain on the agenda. We have had a meeting recently with the DMF, and they are willing to take into consideration a lot of the progressive programs that we have here on Nantucket, like the pump out program, and take into consideration the types of boats that are on the moorings and where the moorings are. So I don't think it's like set in stone that if there are 20 boats on a mooring, you're not going to be able to shellfish. So we're currently working on putting stuff together and talking to Sheila about what exactly Nantucket has, and so that they have that information available when they're making their decisions.
Thank you. Anybody else? Board members? Not seeing any. We have no new business for tonight's meeting. Public questions and comments on anything we've discussed tonight in old business or health of harbor? Not seeing any. Board members, anything to recap or items for our next meeting?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Franzuto.
yeah, while I have Jeff and Tara captive, I just wanted to ask them if you could resend me that CPC application so I can forward it to Chatham because they've managed to lose the one you sent me before.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, because they are making application for that boathouse. It's coming back to Chatham. So, and as far as the comment about the proactive way we've dealt with things for many, many years, I still think that we pump more sewage than any other community on the East Coast. So I think their concern is that I read something and I can't remember where I read it now, but the FDA and the EPA and those guys are saying that they're treating every boat like it has a head. And that's just not true. And number one. Number two, we pump more sewage than any other community. So I think all of our activities, the water quality activities and the sewage pump out should hold us in good stead to not close shellfishing for some silly reason like there's 20 moorings there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franzuto. If there's nothing else, first I'd
Yeah.
like, yes.
Mr. Franzito, how come we always end up talking about poop?
You know, I said that for years. For some reason, it always comes back to poop. Sorry.
On that note,
It's the truth.
I know.
Tara and Jeff, thanks for all of your participation tonight.
Thank you, you guys. I really
Very
appreciate
good.
it.
If there's nothing else, our next meeting is March 16th. Tara, if the land council water quality discussion is before March 16th, please email those dates to Peter so he can send it out to us, or across the board, email it out to us so we know any meetings that we could possibly pop in on to keep us up to speed of what's happening would be wonderful. So our next meeting is March 16th. If there's nothing else, I will harbor a motion from the board to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's made by Mr. Brace, seconded by Mr. Bossy to adjourn tonight's meeting. All in favor, Mr. Sidlowski,
Aye.
Mr. Pronk,
Aye.
Mr. Franzuto,
I won't be at the next meeting. That's the day I'm headed south. So, aye for the adjournment.
we'll keep you informed. Thank you, Mr. Franzuto. Chair votes aye. One thing I missed in chairman's report was that our meetings are posted on YouTube. So there's a link there that's available. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a
You got
wonderful
it.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.